Dungeons & Dragons is just chock full of creatures that want to mess with your brain. We got Mind Flayers out here eating brains, Grail out here being brains, Aboleth, Beholders, Neogi, the list goes on. There are so many creatures that have the ability to influence others or straight up dominate them with mind control, and that's not even accounting for the entire school of enchantment magic. But across all the different creatures that fall into this category of mind-altering baddies, there is one that stands alone in terms of pure, unadulterated weirdness. Even amongst a bunch of other creatures doing ranked competitive weirdness, they are unopposed. I'm talking, of course, about the Tsochari. Obviously, we all know the Tsochari, right, fellas? Back in 2005, Lords of Madness, the Book of Aberrations, was released for D&D 3.5. The format of this book is very similar to the 5th edition book Volo's Guide to Monsters. It's got a little introductory section followed by 6 lengthy sections that take up over half the book, deep diving into 6 specific monsters, and then a bestiary with a bunch of new stat blocks along with player options, new spells. You get the idea. And much like Volo's Guide, the 6 deep dive monster features are all iconic creatures that fit the book's theme. But among the Aboleths, Beholders, Mind Flayers, Neogi, and Grell, the Tsochari were introduced not just as a brand new monster, but an entirely new species and culture. Their chapter, titled Wearers of Flesh, kicks off with the line, "Murderous assassins and infiltrators from a cold and distant world, the Tsochari come to this world to steal magic for their own nefarious purposes." Upon reading just that, I was like, okay, sure, that's nothing new. We have monsters that can mind control and body snatch other creatures, so what makes a Tsochar worth my time? Well, it turns out a lot of stuff. Tsochari are small aberrations, appearing as a mass of tentacles with a mouth that looks like the protagonist from Stranger Things and some hooked blades for hands. But there's a bit more going on here. Tsochari are communal organisms, meaning that each one of them is comprised of several smaller, less advanced creatures who come together to form a single entity. Each strand of the Tsochar's body is an independent life form which, granted, on their own, are little more than an eel with slightly higher intelligence, but together can combine their psionic ability into a single consciousness. These strands are hatched by the Tsochari in nurseries, where they are either incorporated into existing Tsochar or are assigned to come together and form a new individual. While the strands have a maximum lifespan of about 100 years, this does mean that as long as an individual Tsochar continues to replace old strands as they die off, there's no upper limit on how old they can theoretically be, which is great for them because they got shit to do, like wearing the flesh of other creatures, for instance. Tsochari have the incredibly unpleasant ability to slither into an orifice of an unconscious or paralyzed creature and make themselves cozy. Once inside, they can do 2 things. They can simply destroy the host's nervous system and replace it with their own slithering tendrils, effectively hijacking the victim's body and using it like a Gundam made of meat, killing the host in the process. Or they can simply choose to hang out, be chill, and just vibe within the victim's innards. If they choose the latter, you might think they'd get up to some mind control shenanigans, but the reality of the situation is so much weirder, and arguably worse. Instead of simply using magic to dominate the creature, they will try to influence its behavior by causing them pain when they do something the Tsochar doesn't like. For example, say you're in a house and the Tsochar doesn't want you to leave for whatever reason. Every time you go towards the exit, the Tsochar is gonna send a sickening pain that courses through your body, which subsides as you move away from the exit. It doesn't take a genius to pretty much immediately realize getting close to that door is a bad idea. Obviously, this is a distilled and simplified example, but it can cause pain that is subtle in its influence or entirely overwhelming and debilitating, allowing them to essentially condition their host to do what they want them to do. However, if the Tsochar isn't interested in a long-term subtle manipulation ploy, it does have telepathy, and it can communicate with the host, tell them what it wants, and explain to them carefully that if it doesn't do what they want, then the Tsochar is gonna blend their guts into a smoothie, or just hijack their nervous system and do it themselves. But whether the Tsochar is inside a stolen body or still living creature, it's gotta eat. And it does so by slowly absorbing the non-essential parts of the creature from the inside out. And once it runs out of non-essential bits, well, It's only a matter of time before it has to eat something inside that causes the host to collapse and die, likely after being quite sickly for a while.
Hey guys, I think I might be coming down with something too.
Because I have to imagine that even if the host's body is relatively healthy, it's probably quite painful and not exactly good for your health to be consumed from the inside. But hey, not a doctor. Now the tsochar is of course aware that this might be an issue if it wants to stay in a body for an extended period of time, so in such instances it will simply have its host seek out healing magic that can suitably restore the creature's damaged body to ensure that they can persist despite the tsochar's feeding. As you can imagine, this makes them incredibly dangerous infiltrators, capable of not just mimicking the appearance of another creature like a doppelganger might, but actively overtaking them, literally becoming them in every conceivable way, even keeping their mind intact if that's something the creature needs for whatever scheme it's hatching. But the real question here is why? Why do they do the things they do? And to what end? Well, as it turns out, Tsochari are insanely religious. This is something about them I find really fascinating, because most aberrations are not that faithful to any higher power, let alone a god, and many of them are actively anti-god. So who or what do the Tsochari worship? They worship a mysterious deity known only as Nagatha, the nine-tongued worm. At least, I think that's how it's pronounced. My deep speech is a little rusty. As a god of chaos from the far realm, you know old Nine Tongues is up to some classic cosmic horror shenanigans, such as, oh you know, devouring entire worlds. Such world-devouring behavior is probably what got him his nickname, Devourer of Worlds, because sometimes things are just what they say they are. In their mythology, the Tsochari are all made up of tendrils shed by this god who would send them down to planes of existence which he intended to conquer. Once they had been sent to the world in question, they were expected to infiltrate and use their abilities to foster deranged cults and attempt to open portals that would allow creatures from the far realm to invade, ultimately dragging the entire world into the far realm and the domain of their god. It is also explicitly stated that Nagatha has an obsessive interest with the material plane, so that's probably not good. Something else that makes the Tsochari so unique is that they have a pretty rigid caste system, with the chosen clerics and priests of their god on top, nobles directly below them, and an endlessly complex web of different castes beneath that. So aside from appeasing their elder god, everything an individual Tsochar does is essentially to try and prove itself in order to ascend within said caste system, maybe even becoming a noble themselves someday, or even a cleric, worm god willing. Which is all properly horrific when you remind yourself of the fact that the way these creatures prove themselves is by committing acts of body horror that would make Geiger blush before feeding a chunk of some unassuming plane to the elder evil who birthed their ancestors. There's a lot you can do with a creature like this, but let's go over how their abilities actually work real quick. The stat block itself is deceptively simple in many ways. They've got a challenge rating of 3, and they have a tentacle attack that does a bit of damage as well as grappling their enemy. Thanks to their latch-on trait though, being grappled doesn't prevent the target from moving around, but it does allow the Tsochar to move with it, which is kind of fun. The big threat posed by this creature here is of course their poison sting, which is a bonus action that allows them to poison a creature which they have grappled, and of course deal some poison damage along the way. But this ain't just some garden variety poison, this is a neurotoxin designed to paralyze a potential host. If you fail the saving throw on their poison by more than 5, you get paralyzed for a round. And if you're knocked to 0 hit points by the poison, you are paralyzed for a full minute, but you immediately become stable, which might seem like a good thing until the Tsochar gets its second turn. This is important because the Tsochar doesn't want to kill its prey. Most of the time, it just wants to disable them long enough for it to use its other action called Wear Flesh. Now, wearing someone's flesh is a simple ordeal, but this action is pretty wordy on account of making sure that the DM has all the tools they need to properly run this creature. More or less, this action chalks up to the Tsochar invading the host's body of a paralyzed or unconscious creature, whereupon it chooses to either bore out their nervous system, killing them instantly, or just hang out in their new favorite meat sack. Whatever it chooses to do, the host is pretty much fucking cooked. Even if they're still alive, the Tsochar can choose to deal a ton of slashing damage to them as an action, which cannot be prevented on account of the fact that they're literally just shredding them from the inside. So for whatever reason, it might choose to let you live, Just don't piss it off. Something else important to note about this ability is that the tsochar takes half the amount of damage dealt to the host body, whether they're alive or dead, so theoretically, if it invades someone durable and stupid enough to start stabbing themselves with a sword, they could survive by simply outlasting the creature inside of them. And honestly, the idea of one of these creatures invading a barbarian who just goes into a rage and starts stabbing at themselves and ripping this creature out is awesome. So either way, go for it. The only other variable to really consider here is whether or not the tsochar in question is a noble. Nobles have roughly the same stats as the standard tsochar, but they're way more intelligent. Their telepathy allows them to pinpoint the location of thinking creatures, like a hacker in a Call of Duty lobby, and most importantly, they can cast spells. Nobles are pretty rare, but I did make sure to include a sidebar with information on them in case you want to upgrade your bundle of worms that form a colony organism into a fancy bundle of worms that form a colony organism. And if they ascend to the point where they're a cleric, at that point you're just giving them class levels. But as you can see, the Tsochari are laser focused on their design to be infiltrators and body snatchers extraordinaire, which I really appreciate about them. We love a creature who knows what they're about. And I mean, the concept of a widespread Tsochari infiltration has got to be one of the most terrifying things of all time when you really think about it. If they're going full-scale takeover mode, by the time anyone realizes what's going on, it's probably too late, because of course they're gonna start by replacing every person of importance within the region's government, whether that's a ruling monarch and their advisors, a small council, or a democratically elected governing body. The first major target for any Tsochari infiltration is gonna be the people in charge. And once that happens, it's just a matter of time before they can replace or otherwise subjugate any and all common folk within the land, unless of course a scrappy band of heroes comes together to try and stop them. You could play out a plotline like this in so many different ways. You could run it like a game of political intrigue where the players are all officials in said government and have to try and get to the bottom of this nefarious plot before it's too late, or you could go with a more classic fantasy style type game where the players are all locals in the kingdom and maybe they just discover a tsochar somewhat by accident within the city. Do they then investigate what's going on? Do they tell the general public and risk the spreading panic in the streets? Or do they just take on the whole Tsochari invasion force by themselves? Or maybe they just get the people they care about and f*** off into the sunset. Also a valid option, and quite frankly, wouldn't blame them for it. There's a ton of room for all variety of body snatchers style plotlines here, and I think that sounds like a lot of fun. So either as part of that story or a smaller separate story of its own, you could have a cult dedicated to the Tsochari god, where a group of cultists are attempting to summon them from the far realm into the material plane for some nefarious purpose, either as part of a takeover or something different entirely. Who knows, maybe the nine-tongued worm is just hungry. Many such cultists consider it a blessing to be chosen as the host of a tsochar and gladly welcome the creature into their flesh. Such cultists are likely the ones leading these cults and provide a really interesting opportunity for a batshit crazy NPC interaction and a really cool fight. Because when a creature is willing to accept a tsochar and basically do whatever the mass of eels tells them to do, while it might seem like you're just dealing with a single entity on its face, from the inside, you're actually dealing with two. The tsochar can impart all of its knowledge to the host with ease, meaning that the host has access to all kinds of weird and esoteric things it normally wouldn't have, which could even include some spells if the tsochar inside of them is a noble. And if the cultist is ever backed into a corner, the tsochar could always exit its body and fight alongside the creature, quickly leaving their body in a horrific display sure to scar anyone around who happens to see it take place. If you want to do something super mean, give the tsochar in question sorcerer levels and allow them to cast spells without using somatic components so that they can cast spells from inside of this creature, not needing to move around their body to do so. The players might write it off as this guy having legendary actions or something, but they're actually tracking the initiative of two separate creatures. And then of course when his guts spill out and it turns out that it's a mass of writhing tentacles that then tries to kill them, horrible, horrific, bad, get it away from me, and also like the perfect thing to throw at a D&D party. I'm definitely doing this. Also, there's nothing in the rules that says a host body can only house a single tsochar at once.
Ain't no rules said the dog can't play basketball?
Maybe the high cult leader of this organization has a tsochar burrowed into every limb as well as their torso. In the final showdown, the creatures could all leap from his body, shifting this fight from the party against one cult master and his minions to the party versus one cult master, his minions, and the 5 Tsochari nobles hidden within his corpse. I guess he's not a corpse, he's still alive for the time being, but you gotta imagine his limbs are just gonna explode, right? The idea of them just bursting forth is straight up horrific, and I hope someone watching this video decides to do this as an encounter because I so badly want to hear about how the players react. This might be the most horrific monster we've done so far this month. If you want an example of how you might adapt Tsochari to exist in another world or setting, there is one place where they do show up in D&D beyond this book, and that is in the world of Eberron. Specifically, Eberron Expanded, which is a column run, or that was run, by Keith Baker himself on the old Wizards of the Coast website, where he would, and you're not gonna believe this, expand Eberron. Specifically Eberron's lore often as it relates to other creatures. In the first posting of Keith's Eberron column, he was actually adapting monsters from Lords of Madness into his setting, so there is some info on how he adapted the Tsochari to fit his world. It's a cool little glimpse into the kind of stuff you might want to consider when adapting any monster into your own game world, even beyond just the Tsochar stuff. I highly recommend checking it out if that's something you're trying to do because it's very useful. Unfortunately, it is gone from the internet because that website doesn't exist anymore as it once was, but thanks to the Wayback Machine, you can still see an archived version of it. I'll link to that down below if any of you want to check it out. In Keith's column, rather than being from the Far Realm, the Tsochari were created by an intelligent species known as the Dalekir, and without turning this into an Eberron lore video, the concept here is that as a created race of creatures, the Tsochari are used as living weapons by their masters, who send them as sort of a vanguard force to steal magical secrets from their enemies and weaken them before the main force arrives. Rather than being devoted to a god, they are fanatically devoted to their creators, and because of this, they have a rivalry with mind flayers who've got their own thing going on in Eberron, but as far as the Tsochari go, they believe that they deserve to be in a favored position which mind flayers currently occupy within aberration culture, which is a neat twist on their drive to climb the social ladder, I think. Plus, it gives them an immediate relation with a whole other species, and that's cool. It's good world building. Point is, there's a lot going on with these little wormy guys, and I think they're just brimming with story potential. As much as Wizards of the Coast was clearly trying to make Tsochari the next big inclusion of aberrant creature types, for whatever reason, they just didn't really stick. And I mean, this happens for a lot of different reasons. It might have been the case of the book not selling well, though from what I could find online, it was well received. Couldn't find sales numbers, I don't think those are public, so I don't know. It also might be that they didn't get printed in basically any adventures, so unless you happen to have this specific book or you read the Eberron column about them, there wasn't a lot of exposure for the Tsochar to be discovered in the first place. Or it could simply be that they just didn't resonate with people, and as much as I think these creatures are awesome, I am not the ultimate arbiter or decider of what the broader audience of Dungeons & Dragons players thinks is cool. I will say though, this is a new aberrant species that's not just a monster, but an entire culture, and I think they add a much needed bit of spice to the Far Realm and the creatures that live there. The fact that they're a colony organism is a fun direction to take them. I think their abilities are weird enough to differentiate them from the other aberrations, and I think their uber religious culture and methodology not only justifies their existence as a new type of creature, but adds a whole new angle of approach to their storytelling with an aberrant culture at the center of it, all of which are extremely important markers for an iconic creature in a game like D&D. So hey, next time you're playing out a campaign where a bunch of slimy aberrations with impossibly complex motives are serving as the antagonists, sure, you can always use mind flayers or Neogi, but don't count out the Tsochari. I think they're an extremely cool monster that was just never really given the proper chance to shine, which makes them the greatest infiltrators of them all when you really think about it. If you do want to use these bad boys at the game table, as always, my 5th edition conversion is linked in the description down below for free, always. And of course, if you're one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you can find the PDF stat block, which contains all the same information as the Google document version, but with some fancier layout, and of course it is an actual PDF and it's got the new artwork and everything, just as my way of saying thank you to those of you who decide to throw a few bucks my way each month. and help me keep on doing what I'm doing. And if you want another way to support the channel, check out the video game I helped make. Titankin Prologue is a game made by my buddy Chris back in 2021, and I did all the music and sound design for it. The game itself is an RPG heavily inspired by Celtic mythology and the place where we both live, which is also pretty steeped in Celtic mythology. For the game's 4th anniversary, Chris has gone ahead and given it a big old update with tons of new features and graphical overhauls that has it looking... Now you can even find me in-game, playing some bagpipes, as I often do. As the name suggests, it is a prologue, so it's about 3 to 6 hours long and sets up the story for a much larger adventure yet to come. I absolutely loved working on this project. It's wild to think that it's already been 4 years, because at the time, it was just an all-consuming passion project for both of us. But as I said, if you want to support me, go check it out, enjoy the new update stuff, because part of the game's profit comes my way and the rest of it goes to support an indie game dev who has a lot of really great ideas on the horizon. I'll leave a link to the Steam page in the description down below, so check it out if that sounds like something you might be into. And now, of course, it's the part of the show where you know I gotta give a huge shout out to this week's randomly selected patron of the week. Thank you so much to Parava for your gargantuan amount of support. I couldn't do it without you. And thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster you'd like to see show up in a future episode of Monster of the Week, let me know in the comments down below or in the Dungeon Dad Discord, which is also linked down below. And who knows, you might just see it show up in a future episode of this show. I can't believe we're already in the back half of Spooky Month. I've had so much fun talking about all different horror-related creatures over the past few weeks. And next week, I've got something incredibly special lined up, which is gonna be dropping on Halloween night or day. I guess it depends on what time we actually get the upload finished and all that stuff, but it's coming on Halloween. And we're talking not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 brand new monsters who all share a theme that you will be able to take and put in your game and do the thing you do with D&D monsters. You know how this all works. But they're a bunch of undead that provide a twist on a classic creature, or rather a group of classic creatures that I think you're all gonna really enjoy. For those of you who've been watching this channel since the before times, it is a rework of something I talked about almost a decade ago, but I've been meaning to do this video for a long time, and I'm very excited to show them to you. In any case, I'll see you next week. Until then.